Good morning, dolphins, and now let's talk about matter. Matter is the next unit that we're going to start covering. We're going to start off with the vocabulary for matter. But before we start with vocabulary, let's talk about which standard we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering standard 6P21, which basically says, recognize that all matter is made up of atoms, and atoms of the same element are alike, but are different from atoms of other elements. We will go into much more detail when we get into that a little bit later. Now listen to this quote, because your next task is to actually define matter. Think about how you would define matter after listening to this. Matter everywhere. There's matter in your hair. Matter in the air. There's even matter in a pear. There's liquid matter, solid matter, matter that's a gas. Even you are matter, because you have volume and mass. Now is where you guys are going to start writing. On your vocabulary sheet, there are 5 words that you need to write down. I need you to write down the following 5 words. In number 1, you write matter. In number 2, atom. Number 3, elements. Number 4, molecule/compound. And number 5, particles. Now, I want you to stop the video, and I want you to take an educated guess on what you think each one is before you go on to the next slide. Please do this at this time. Let's start with our first word, matter. Matter is anything that has mass and volume. So how do we determine if something has matter? Basically, it has weight and mass and takes up space. Volume is another word for taking up space. Let's move on to the second word. The second word is atom. Matter is composed of extremely small particles called atoms. This is the bullet you need to copy down in your notes. These particles are too small to be seen with a microscope. That's why we use something called an electron microscope to see them. Now let's talk about how small these atoms are. Atoms are so small that it would take a stack of about 50,000 aluminum atoms to equal the thickness of a sheet of aluminum foil from your kitchen. That is amazing. Think about how small that is. Atoms are so small that if you took a penny and enlarged it to basically make it fit the whole U.S., each of its atoms would be only about 3 centimeters in diameter. That's about the size of a ping pong ball. Also, a human hair is about 1 million carbon atoms wide. A typical human cell is 1 trillion atoms. A speck of dust might contain 3 trillion atoms. It would take around 500 years to count the number of atoms in a grain of salt. Think about that. Now let's move on to the third word. The third word is element. Elements are made up of atoms which make up matter. This is the bullet you need to copy down. There are more than 100 elements that can combine to make up all living and non-living things. Elements are shown on the periodic table. On the next slide, you will actually get to see a picture of the periodic table. Here is a picture of the periodic table. Notice that each element has a special abbreviation. Each of these abbreviations represents one element, and each of these elements represents one kind of atom. Moving on to the fourth word. The fourth word is molecule/compound. Molecule/compound are formed when 2 or more elements combine. If you take a look, down at the bottom you have 2 rows. The first row is basically elements that are similar. So for example, hydrogen with hydrogen, oxygen with oxygen, nitrogen with nitrogen, chlorine with chlorine. The second row is where we actually mix 2 different elements to make a compound/molecule. So we have nitrogen and oxygen, H2O, which is 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, nitrogen dioxide, 1 nitrogen, 2 oxygen, and carbon dioxide, 1 carbon, 2 oxygen. If you notice, each element is a different color, meaning that each element is a different atom. However, if you're looking at the top row, The two elements that are the same color, meaning that they are the same atom. Let's now talk about our fifth and final word. Our fifth and final word is particles. Particles are smaller pieces of anything, of the item. So for example, particles are the smaller pieces of atoms. If you take a look down there, you can actually see the atoms in solids, liquids, and gases. Moving on to the next slide. This is a pretty awesome picture because this picture basically represents all 5 words that we just talked about. This is a picture of Superman. Superman is made up of matter. Well, if you take a look at the picture really closely, you can see that this picture is made up of even smaller pictures. Well, these smaller pictures are basically compounds that create the bigger picture. And then those compounds are made up of elements, which are the smaller pieces or the smaller pictures. These smaller pictures then are created of atoms. These atoms then have particles. So it basically builds upon itself, creating the whole picture. Now that we have gone through all 5 words, what I'd like for you to do tonight for homework is to create 5 vocabulary memory cards. And I'm going to show you how to make those in just a second. Now, once you are finished with those memory cards, you need to study. You need to study all 5 vocabulary words. Hint, hint. If you want more study strategies, play the memory game with your friends and family. Play the game by yourself. If you want to create even more stuff, you can create a Quizlet or any other online flashcard game. Let's talk about the directions for creating the memory game. You will create the playing cards for the game memory using the vocabulary words from the Matter Vocabulary PowerPoint that we just watched. Each word will have 2 cards. The way that you will create this card is you'll take one note card, cut it in half. What you're going to do is one note card is going to be on the blank side. That's where you're going to put your vocabulary term. So place the vocabulary term on the half where there's no lines. Then on the second card, you're going to turn it to the part that has the lines. You're going to place the definition and picture of the term on the other half with the lines. Be sure you do not mark any marks or make any marks on the back of the card. Write your initials in the top right hand corner of each card just to make sure that if you ever lose it, you can find it. On this slide, I'm actually going to give you an example of what your note card should look like, or your note cards should look like. So as you can see, the first box is the vocabulary word with your initials up the top. Notice that it's a blank card. There's nothing on it except for the word and your initials. On the second one, you actually have lines. That's where you're going to write your definition. You're going to draw a picture of what you think the word means. Now, does your picture have to match my picture? No, it does not. Your picture can be anything that will help you remember what that word means. As a reminder, do not write on the back of the cards at all, and always put your initials at the top right-hand corner. And now moving on to the last and final step. Now that you have finished creating the cards, guess what you get to do? You get to play memory! Memory. Turn all the cards upside down, spread them out on your desk. You obviously know which ones are the words and which ones are the definitions because the words are on the blank side, the definitions are on the line side. You're going to turn over one card. Then you're going to turn over another card. If the 2 cards are a match, you get to keep the match and you get to take another turn. If you do not have a match, you turn it back over and the next person takes the turn. The cards are a match if you have a vocabulary and its correct definition. If you have a word and the incorrect definition, that means you have to turn them back over and it's the next person's turn.